The third thing that might happen in perfect competition is that the firm might shut down. And so that would mean the price would have to be below the average variable cost curve, and then it's not worth producing anymore. A firm may decide that it needs to shut down, and so let's see what that graph would look like. And again, you're going to have a side-by-side graph. So you have your price, your quantity, and again, this is the industry. And then we can draw our supply curve and our demand curve. And then we'll draw our other price and quantity. And again, this is the firm. So that's the firm, and again, it's just the individual firm in thousands. And we're going to just take the supply and demand, where that is equal. We'll draw that line straight over. That will be the marginal revenue curve. And then we can draw in the marginal cost curve as well. Nice little check mark. And again, you can see this is kind of the bare bones of what you need to draw. And then we need to think about the next two curves. And so you have the average cost curve. And since I'm shutting down or losing money, the average cost curve must be above the marginal revenue curve. So I'll draw that in and make sure that intersects the marginal cost curve at the minimum point there. And now we need to put in the average variable cost curve. If they were making a loss and still operating, we would know we could pay for the average variable cost. And so then that would be below the marginal revenue curve. But if we are still, or if we are losing money and we can't pay for the average variable cost, then the average variable cost curve must be above the marginal revenue curve. So anywhere above the marginal revenue curve would be fine. And that is the AVC. And that shows that this firm should shut down. They can't cover any of their costs, so it's not worth it for them to operate. And again, here's the computerized version of it, and you can just see the average variable cost curve and the average cost curve are above the marginal revenue. And so even though the average variable cost hits that price line there, if it hits the price or is above, that firm should shut down. And here's just a little note. You can take a look at this. What happens if price is greater than the average total cost curve? Well, then they're making a profit. If it's equal to the average total cost curve, they're breaking even, and it's zero or normal economic profit. And if it's less than the average total cost curve, then they are actually losing money and might exit in the industry in the long run. And you can see the same thing there with the average variable cost curve, when they should shut down and when they should keep producing. So it's just a nice little summary of the perfect competition. In the long run, again, it's easy to enter and exit the market, and there's intense competition. Everyone's producing the exact same thing. It might be an example like wheat or some other agricultural product that are exactly the same. You have farmer A and farmer B, farmer C, all producing wheat. Well, they're all the exact same thing. You can't really tell the difference. So it's easy to enter the market, easy to exit, and everyone's selling a homogeneous product. And again, profits are where MR equals MC. That gives me normal or zero economic profit. And that would be where the bottom of the average cost curve would be, because price would not be above the average cost curve, otherwise we'd be making a profit. And the price can be below the average cost curve because you may be making a loss. So it'll have to be at the average cost curve, and that'll be normal or zero economic profit. We're going to look at drawing a short-run profit to long-run equilibrium. And so again, we'll have our side-by-side graphs. And of course, this is the industry. And we'll draw our supply curve and our demand curve. And then we have our next graph here. Draw your price, draw your quantity, and then this is the firm. And you can take your marginal revenue curve from where supply and demand are equal and draw that line straight over. That's your marginal revenue curve. And you have your marginal cost curve. And then you have to decide where your average cost curve goes, and if I'm making a profit, and that's what it says, then it must be below the price or the marginal revenue curve. So I'll draw that in somewhere below the price, intersecting the marginal cost curve and going up. And then I will identify my output. So the rule, of course, is where MR equals MC. So I look for that point, draw a line down, that's my quantity for the firm. And I can even shade in my profit here. There's my profit. And so that's the short run profit. And so you've already drawn that already, so that's not too bad. Then you have to draw it to long run equilibrium. So what's going to happen in the long run? If I'm making profit, and you see me making profit, what are you going to do if it's easy to enter and exit? Well, if you said you would enter the market, you are right. And so what we can do then is draw this line at the bottom of the average cost curve here. We can draw that straight over. And since new firms do enter the market, that would increase the overall supply. So label that S1. So that looks pretty good. That's not too bad. A couple of things that you would need to know, though. You'd have to locate the original price of the product. So let's do that. We'll label that price. And then we'd have to locate the new price. And so there we have P1 there. And then we know that price went down. We could also look at quantity. And so there's quantity. And then if we have the new quantity, we would draw that straight down. And then there's our new quantity, knowing then that quantity goes up for the industry because of all the firms that entered the market. Now the question is, what happens to the individual firm? What happens to price and quantity there? Well, price is pretty easy because the marginal revenue is the price. And so if it's P1, then over here in the firm, it must be MR1. And that's the price. So we know that price went down. And then we just want to find where MR equals MC again, right? So that's the rule for trying to find the output. So we look to see where they're equal, and then we would just draw a line straight down. There's our new quantity. And so we can see, since there's so many firms entering, that no one really wants to buy our product. At least there's not as many people as there was before. And so our quantity goes down because of all the new other stores that are opening. And that's the short run profit to long run equilibrium. All right, I told you there was a lot of curves for that one. So hopefully this is getting easier. Again, we'll just practice it in class a lot too. But here's a computerized version of it. Supply, demand, draw your marginal revenue curve. And there's your average cost curve below the marginal revenue. And MR equals MC, find your quantity. I see that I'm making a profit. If there's a profit to be made, new firms are going to enter. It's going to drive that price down to the bottom of the average cost curve, showing that there is zero or normal economic profit. Let's draw a short-run loss to long-run equilibrium. And of course we need our side-by-side graphs. So here's my price and here's my quantity, and this is the industry. And then I have my supply curve and my demand curve. And then it's a side-by-side graph. So there's my price and my quantity, and it's my firm. And then I need to look where supply and demand are equal and draw that line straight over. And that is the marginal revenue curve. Draw my check mark for marginal cost. And then I need to put in the average cost curve. And since I'm making a loss, the average cost must be above the price or the marginal revenue curve. So I will draw in the average cost curve. And then, since I'm not shutting down, the average variable cost curve has to be below the marginal revenue curve. So let's draw that in. So here's my average variable cost curve. And I can identify where the quantity is going to be by following the simple rule of MR equals MC. So I locate that point and draw a straight line down. There's my quantity. I can also identify my loss in this graph too. So there's my lovely little rectangle. And so that's the short run loss, but again, we want to get to long run. So if I'm making a loss, what are some firms going to eventually do? You're right, they're probably going to exit. So that's going to drive that price up to the average cost curve. So let's draw that line, and we'll take it straight over, and we'll draw in a new supply curve, and that just shows the different industries that are leaving. So then we can again look at what happened to price and quantity. So in the industry, price and quantity originally were here, so we'll label that P. And now the price is a lot higher, so that's P1, showing that price went up in the industry with the firms leaving. The quantity originally was here, and the new quantity is going to decrease, so that's Q1. So you can see what happened in the industry. Now let's take a look at the firm. So again, if this is P1, then this must be right here, MR1. And I look at where does that intersect the marginal cost curve. Well, I got to draw it straight over. So I do that, draw it down, and that's Q1 over here. So if I stay in business and everybody else is shutting down, well, then that means more people are going to come to me now. And so my quantity would go up. So the price goes up for the firm, and the quantity goes up for the firm. And that is a short run loss. All right, and then you can see there's just 2 slides left, finally, huh? It says the short run supply is the marginal cost curve that lies above the average variable cost. So when you look at the marginal cost curve, think of that as your supply curve. And again, that's only the part that's above the average variable cost curve, because if it's below, you would not actually produce. So it's just the part that's above the average variable cost curve. And in the long run, it says the marginal cost curve is above the minimum point of the average total cost curve, because in the long run, the price is going to be at the minimum of the average cost curve. The last slide I have for you then is just looking at simply long run equilibrium for perfect competition. If you were simply asked to draw long run equilibrium for perfect competition, this is the one time where you wouldn't necessarily have to draw a side-by-side graph. You could, and it won't be wrong, but let me just show you real quick here what you could draw instead. For long-run equilibrium for the firm, we would just draw the firm's graph, and so we would have price and quantity, and we would have our marginal revenue curve, which is perfectly elastic, and then my marginal cost curve. And in the long run, the average cost curve isn't below the price because I'm not making a profit. It's not above the marginal revenue line or the price because I'm not making a loss. I'm making zero economic or normal economic profit. And so that average cost curve must come right where MR equals MC, hit that point, and go back up. And that's what it looks like in the long run. So if you're asked just to draw that simply, that's all you'd have to do. You won't have to put in the side-by-side graph. So that's pretty simple.